The restaurant was buzzing with energy, the kind that only comes from people who have too much money and too little patience. The lights were bright, the tables perfectly arranged, and the air carried the faint scent of expensive candles mixed with the aroma of gourmet food. A young waitress moved among the tables, balancing trays filled with plates of artfully arranged meals. Her uniform was crisp, her smile polite, and her steps quick but careful. She knew exactly how to navigate the crowded space without spilling anything, without drawing attention to herself. That was part of the job, being seen but not noticed. She had been working here for over a year, and in all that time she had learned the rhythm of the place. She knew which guests were difficult and which ones were polite. She knew which tables expected small talk and which preferred silence. Her eyes flicked from table to table as she moved, taking mental notes of orders, complaints, and tips. She had become almost invisible in the sense that she could blend into the background, carrying on with her work as if she belonged to the furniture. But inside she carried a secret, a talent that had nothing to do with serving food and everything to do with her heart. She could play music like no one would expect, a gift she had held close for years. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and the restaurant wasn't as crowded as it could have been. A few wealthy couples sat sipping wine, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes occasionally darting toward the stage in the corner where a musician was supposed to perform. But tonight the musician hadn't shown up. The manager, looking slightly panicked, whispered to the staff, trying to figure out a solution. No one seemed ready to step up, and the room started to hum with the uneasy expectation of the guests. The waitress continued her work, her tray steady, her mind alert to every detail around her. She could feel the tension in the room, the subtle shifting of bodies, the impatient tapping of fingers on the tables. Something stirred inside her, a strange pull she couldn't ignore. She had always played in private, in her small apartment where no one could see, where the world couldn't judge. But tonight, in the middle of a room full of people who would likely dismiss her, she felt a sudden, compelling urge to perform. It was as if the music itself was calling her, demanding to be heard. She paused for a moment near the piano, glancing at it as though it were a person. The polished keys seemed to gleam under the light, waiting, inviting her to sit. Her fingers itched with the memory of scales, the sound of notes flowing together in perfect harmony. She imagined the room filled with music, the sharp edges of the guests' critical expression softened by the sound. And for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to dream, not about applause or fame, but about simply sharing what she loved with the world, however intimidating that world might be. The manager approached, wiping sweat from his brow. He muttered something about the canceled performer and how they needed someone, anyone, to fill the slot. The waitress nodded politely, offering her hands to carry another tray, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the piano, about the notes she could play, about the possibility of turning the skeptical, snobby faces into something open, something moved. Her heart raced. She had never performed in front of strangers before, especially not in a place like this. The thought of it made her stomach twist with nervous excitement. What if they laughed? What if they whispered behind their hands, calling her foolish for trying? But the pull was too strong. She realized that sometimes the risk of staying silent was far greater than the risk of standing up and trying. She imagined the music flowing, the guests stopping their chatter, the room becoming still, suspended in the beauty of sound. That image was enough to make her decision. She set down the tray she was holding, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. She smoothed her uniform, took a deep breath, and stepped toward the stage. Every step felt heavy with anticipation, but also exhilarating. The guests, sensing the movement, turned their heads, curious about the unexpected action. Some smiled politely, some raised eyebrows, but no one spoke. The waitress reached the piano, her fingers brushing lightly against the keys as if testing their weight, their readiness. She glanced at the audience, noting their expressions. A couple of men in tailored suits exchanging skeptical looks. A woman in a designer dress sipping wine with mild curiosity, and a few others who seemed bored, checking their phones. It was a sea of judgment, yet none of that mattered, not now. All that mattered was the music that wanted to pour out of her. The first note was tentative, almost shy, but it held a promise. The second note followed, firmer, more confident. She allowed herself to sink into the rhythm, to feel the vibrations under her fingertips, to let the sound guide her. Slowly the room began to change. The whispers stopped. Eyes lifted. The skeptical glances softened into something closer to attention. though none of the guests yet realized how remarkable what they were hearing truly was. As she played, memories of late nights in her tiny apartment came flooding back. The hours she spent learning, practicing and perfecting her craft when no one was watching. All those moments led to this one. The music flowed from her heart, unpolished but full of emotion, reaching into the room like a hand seeking connection. The walls of formality and judgment seemed to fade as the sound filled every corner, touching even the most indifferent of listeners. A waiter passing by paused mid-step, mesmerized, his tray of food forgotten for a moment. The manager peeked from behind the bar, astonished, realizing that this young woman, whom they had only ever seen carrying plates and smiling politely, was captivating the entire room with something far beyond the expectations of her role. Guests who had scoffed moments before now leaned forward, their expressions softening, their eyes widening. Some whispered to each other, astonished that someone so unassuming could produce such talent. She didn't think about the reaction. She didn't play for the applause or the approval. She played because she had to, because the music demanded it, because it was a part of her that had waited too long to be shared. Each chord seemed to tell a story of resilience, of hidden strength, of the quiet determination of someone who had always been overlooked. And in that telling, the room changed, not just in attention, but in atmosphere, in energy, in mood. As the song continued, even the most critical guests felt a stirring of something unexpected. Admiration, surprise, maybe even humility. They had come expecting polite background noise, something to accompany their expensive meals, and instead, they were witness to a raw, heartfelt display of talent that none of them could have predicted. It was a reminder that brilliance often comes from the most unexpected places. The music continued, a flowing narrative that had no words but spoke volumes. The waitress's fingers danced across the keys, confident now, fearless in the moment. She felt the connection between herself and the audience deepen with each passing note. It wasn't just performance, it was a conversation, an offering, an unspoken sharing of a part of her soul. And for the first time in a long time, she felt seen, truly seen, not just as someone who served food, but as someone who could move hearts. When the final note lingered in the air and the room fell silent, a strange, powerful quiet settled over the restaurant. The guests stared for a heartbeat, suspended between disbelief and awe. Then almost simultaneously, the room erupted into applause. Some clapped enthusiastically, some cheered quietly, and a few even whistled. The sound was overwhelming, not because she sought it, but because it was genuine, spontaneous, and heartfelt. The waitress sat back, her chest heaving slightly, a blush creeping across her cheeks. She had done it. She had taken the leap, shared her gift, and touched people in a way she never thought possible in a place like this. And though she was still just a waitress in uniform, carrying trays and wiping tables, something inside her had shifted. The music had given her courage, given the guests something unforgettable, and reminded everyone present that talent often hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to shine. The applause lingered in the air, echoing softly against the high ceilings. The young waitress's heart was still racing, and her hands trembled slightly from the rush of adrenaline. She had expected some polite clapping, maybe a few murmurs of approval, but this reaction was more than she could have imagined. Faces that had been skeptical and distant now looked at her with surprise and admiration. It was a strange, almost dizzying feeling, being recognized not for her job or her uniform, but for something that came straight from her soul. As she stood, still at the piano, the manager approached, his expression a mix of shock and excitement. He whispered almost breathlessly, "That was incredible. I didn't know you could do that." The words made her smile, a quiet, humble smile, because she had never really considered herself a performer. She had always thought of music as her private escape, a personal comfort rather than a public gift. And yet here she was, standing in front of an audience that had been ready to judge her and instead found themselves captivated. The guests were still clapping, and a few had begun to talk quietly among themselves, sharing their surprise. A man in a sharp suit leaned toward his companion and murmured something, shaking his head as if to convince himself it was real. A woman adjusted her scarf, her eyes wide with disbelief, whispering about how she had expected nothing from a waitress. It was clear to anyone watching that they had been taken off guard, caught between admiration and disbelief. The room, once tense with impatience and subtle judgment, now hummed with a different kind of energy, curiosity, respect, and a strange warmth that the young waitress had never experienced before. She returned to her station for a moment, carefully placing the piano cover back and adjusting her uniform. Her mind was racing, a whirlwind of thoughts she could hardly control. What had just happened? Could this change anything? Or would it simply be a moment that disappeared into memory? She felt a mix of joy and fear, because moments like this could vanish as quickly as they appeared. The applause had been immediate, genuine, but there was a lingering question. What now? Would the guests remember the music or just dismiss it as a lucky accident? She went back to her tables, resuming her work as if nothing extraordinary had happened, though her heart still beat wildly. Plates were set, orders were taken, and drinks were refilled, but everything felt different now. Each smile she received seemed a little warmer, each tip a little more generous. Some guests who had earlier ignored her now glanced her way with interest, as if they were seeing her for the first time. The change was subtle but undeniable. It was a reminder that even small acts of courage could ripple outward, affecting people in ways that words alone could never capture. In the kitchen, the other staff members whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about how they had never seen anything like it. Others smiled knowingly, having always suspected that the young waitress carried something special. There was a sense of pride, a shared recognition that this moment was significant. It wasn't just a performance. It was a breakthrough, a reminder that hidden talents could surface in the most unexpected places. As the evening wore on, more guests approached her, asking questions about the performance, expressing admiration and surprise. She answered politely, keeping her humility, but inside a sense of pride began to grow. She realized that her gift, the talent she had long kept private, could reach people in a way she had never imagined. Each interaction reinforced the idea that the world might be ready to receive her music, if only she dared to share it. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted subtly but significantly. The initial tension, the subtle judgment, and the impatience of the patrons had given way to a sense of appreciation. Conversations were lighter, laughter more genuine, and the air itself seemed warmer. The young waitress moved among the tables with a new energy, carrying not just trays but also the quiet satisfaction of having shared something personal and meaningful. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, and the result was more than applause. It was connection, a shared experience that transcended status or expectation. She found a quiet moment near the piano again, watching as some of the guests lingered, still talking about the performance. One older man, who had been particularly critical at the beginning of the evening, approached and said softly, "I didn't expect that from you. You have real talent." The compliment was unexpected, almost disarming, but it made her smile. It wasn't about recognition or praise, but about being seen, truly seen, for something that mattered deeply to her. As the night continued, the young waitress began to imagine possibilities she had never considered before. Perhaps she could perform again, maybe even outside the restaurant. The thought was exciting and terrifying all at once. Fear of judgment had always held her back, but tonight had shown her a different truth. When she followed her instincts and trusted her own abilities, the result could be transformative. She realized that the music itself was a bridge, connecting her to people who might otherwise never notice her, a bridge that crossed social barriers and broke through preconceived notions. Throughout the evening, she continued to move gracefully among the guests, maintaining her professionalism while feeling an inner shift. The act of sharing her music, of stepping into the spotlight even briefly, had awakened something inside her. It was not just confidence. It was a sense of purpose, a reminder that she had something valuable to offer the world. Every smile, every gesture of acknowledgement from the guests reinforced this newfound understanding. In the kitchen, the staff watched as the young waitress handled herself with grace and composure. Some whispered among themselves about what had just happened, amazed by her ability to captivate such a difficult audience. There was a sense of camaraderie, a quiet celebration of talent that had been hidden in plain sight. It was as if the entire restaurant, from the patrons to the staff, had been touched by the unexpected magic of the performance, even if they didn't fully understand why. By the end of the night, the young waitress felt exhausted but exhilarated. She had faced a fear, taken a risk, and discovered something about herself that she could no longer ignore. The experience had opened a door, showing her that courage and authenticity could create moments of true connection. As she wiped down tables and organized trays, she thought about what the future might hold. The applause, the surprised faces, the whispers of admiration, they were not just fleeting moments. They were reminders that she had the power to step out of the shadows and make her voice heard. Even in a world that often overlooked people like her, when the last guest left, the restaurant grew quiet, the energy of the evening settling into calm. The young waitress lingered near the piano, her fingers brushing the keys once more. The notes were familiar, comforting, a private conversation with herself after the public display. She smiled softly, knowing that she had crossed an invisible line, that her life might never be the same because she had dared to perform. The experience had changed her, not because of the recognition, but because she had trusted herself, embraced her talent, and shared it without reservation. As she closed the piano cover and turned off the lights for the night, the young waitress felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced uncertainty, had taken a risk, and had discovered a new layer of confidence and possibility. The evening had proven that even in a world full of judgment and expectation, there was room for authenticity and talent to shine. She knew that she would carry this moment with her, a reminder of the power of courage, the beauty of unexpected opportunities, and the importance of trusting in oneself. The next morning began quietly, but the young waitress's mind was anything but calm. Her sleep had been restless, filled with fragments of the previous night, the faces of guests, the echoes of applause, and the memory of the music flowing beneath her fingers. It was as if a door had been opened inside her, one that she had long kept locked, and now she could feel it swinging slightly with possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. Arriving at the restaurant, she noticed subtle changes immediately. The staff seemed to move with a quiet sense of curiosity around her. The manager greeted her with an unusually wide smile and a nod that carried more warmth than she had ever seen. Some of her colleagues whispered softly as she passed, glancing at her with new expressions, a mixture of respect and intrigue. Even the tables seemed different. She felt their gaze follow her with a quiet recognition, though most of the guests hadn't returned yet. The performance, though brief, had left a mark that lingered. Orders came in and out. Breakfast dishes were served and coffee cups were refilled, but she couldn't help noticing how her mind kept drifting back to the piano. She thought about the way the notes had flowed, the way her body had moved almost automatically, and the way the room had transformed. She realized that performing had awakened something inside her, an awareness of her own strength, a confidence she hadn't felt before. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Mid-morning, a few guests who had been present the previous night returned. They looked around, recognized her, and smiled politely, some nodding in acknowledgement. One older woman, who had been particularly critical before, approached with a gentle expression and said, "Your music last night was unexpected. Truly beautiful." The words caught her off guard. They were not praise offered out of politeness. They were genuine, carrying a weight she hadn't anticipated. She nodded, offering a small, humble smile, but inside a warm sense of pride began to grow. The day continued with its usual rhythm, orders to take, dishes to clear, and smiles to maintain. Yet beneath the surface, everything felt different. She moved with a quiet confidence, aware that she had stepped into a part of herself that could not be ignored. The thought of performing again flickered in her mind, tempting and terrifying. Could she do it? Could she take the risk a second time, knowing how unpredictable it could be? The memory of the applause urged her forward, but so did the fear of failure, of disappointing the people who now expected something remarkable. By afternoon, the story of her performance had begun to spread among the regulars and staff. Whispers of admiration turned into casual conversations, and then into discussions among the guests who had been present. Some of the restaurant's wealthier patrons, who had initially dismissed her, now spoke of her talent as if they had discovered a hidden gem. It was strange to witness, almost surreal. People she had served plates to without a second thought were suddenly interested in her in a way she had never experienced before. A few staff members approached her privately, offering congratulations and expressing their amazement. They spoke of how they had suspected she had talent, but never imagined it would be so captivating. Some encouraged her to consider performing more often, perhaps even outside the restaurant. She listened, feeling a mixture of humility and excitement, her mind racing with possibilities she had never dared to explore. Each conversation reinforced a sense that this moment was more than a fleeting surprise. It was a turning point. Late in the afternoon, she found herself near the piano again, taking a brief pause from her work. Her fingers hovered over the keys instinctively, and she allowed herself to play a few quiet notes. The sound was softer than the performance from the night before, more intimate, but it carried the same deep connection she had felt. She realized that the piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge to the world, a way to communicate something that words alone could not convey. As she played, she imagined the audience from the night before, their faces softened by the music, their eyes reflecting something beyond surprise, something that hinted at admiration and perhaps even inspiration. The thought encouraged her, giving her a sense of purpose. She felt a quiet determination take hold. This wasn't just about impressing people. It was about expressing a part of herself that had long been hidden, about sharing something deeply personal in a way that could touch others. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Guests came and went, plates were cleared, and coffee was poured. But the awareness of her own potential lingered in every step, every gesture. She noticed details she hadn't before, the subtle way some guests watched her as she moved, the soft tones of appreciation in their voices, the way the room seemed to respond to her presence differently now. It was as if the act of performing had shifted not just her perception of herself, but the perception of those around her. In the evening, a regular patron approached her as she was setting down a tray of desserts. He looked at her intently and said, "I've never seen anything like what you did last night. You should perform more often. You have a gift." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that touched her deeply. She nodded, feeling a mixture of humility and resolve. This was not about seeking approval, she realized, but about recognizing the truth of her own abilities and trusting them. Back in the kitchen, the staff continued their work, but conversations occasionally drifted to her performance. Some joked lightly about how she had surprised everyone, while others spoke more seriously about her talent and the courage it took to share it. There was a sense of camaraderie, a shared acknowledgement that something significant had occurred. It wasn't just the music. It was the act of stepping forward, of challenging expectations, and of revealing a hidden strength. As the night wore on, the restaurant filled once again. The energy in the room felt different from usual, less tense, more open. Guests chatted more freely, laughter was lighter, and the occasional glance toward the stage suggested curiosity rather than judgment. The young waitress moved among the tables with a quiet confidence, carrying trays and offering smiles, all while carrying the knowledge that she had experienced something extraordinary. She realized that this was only the beginning, that the night's performance had opened a door she could not ignore. At one point, a new guest asked about the music, curious about who had played the piano. She explained quietly, offering a polite smile, and the guest's expression changed from casual curiosity to genuine interest. The moment reinforced her understanding that sharing her talent had the power to create connection, to spark curiosity, and to challenge assumptions. It was more than personal satisfaction. It was a way to influence the world, even in small, quiet ways. The shift within her continued to grow. She felt a growing sense of purpose, a realization that her life could expand beyond the routine of trays and tables. The music, once a private sanctuary, had become a bridge to others, a medium through which she could express herself and touch the lives of those around her. Each note she played, each moment she embraced her talent, reinforced the idea that courage and authenticity could lead to unexpected, transformative experiences. By the end of the evening, the young waitress felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been long, filled with the usual demands of work, but the undercurrent of her performance lingered in every interaction, every glance, every word exchanged. She realized that the simple act of trusting herself and stepping forward had changed her perspective, not only on her own abilities but on how she could relate to the world. The night had been a revelation, a reminder that even small, brave actions could ripple outward, affecting people in ways that words alone could not convey. As the restaurant quieted down and the last guests left, she found herself once again near the piano. She ran her fingers over the keys lightly, playing a few quiet notes for herself, savoring the intimate connection she felt with the music. It was a private moment, a reflection of the courage she had summoned and the possibilities that now lay before her. The experience had shown her that life could offer unexpected opportunities, that taking risks could lead to profound personal growth, and that sharing one's gifts could create moments of genuine connection. She closed the piano cover, her fingers lingering for a moment, and turned off the lights for the night. The restaurant was silent, calm and ready for the next day, but she knew that something inside her had shifted permanently. She had crossed a line, embraced a hidden part of herself, and discovered that the world could respond with warmth and admiration when she dared to step forward. The memory of the applause, the surprised faces, and the quiet moments of connection would stay with her, a reminder of what could happen when she trusted in her own abilities and shared them without reservation. It was a beginning, a moment that promised more to come, and she felt ready to meet it with courage and determination. The evening began with the restaurant bustling as usual, but there was a different energy in the air. Patrons moved with an unusual attentiveness, glancing occasionally toward the piano in the corner. It seemed almost as if the space had been marked by the memory of what had happened days before. The young waitress moved gracefully through the crowd, her tray balanced effortlessly, her steps confident yet measured. Inside, her mind was alive with a mixture of nerves and anticipation, because she knew that tonight might be different. The manager, noticing her presence, gave a subtle nod. It was as if he recognized a spark in her, a readiness that hadn't been there before. The staff buzzed quietly in the background, some whispering about her talent and the impact it had made, while others simply smiled knowingly. She felt a warmth in her chest, an unspoken support that made the room feel both familiar and alive with possibility. As the guests settled in, the music slot came up again. There was no scheduled performer, and whispers of curiosity floated through the air. The young waitress felt the familiar pull, the same undeniable urge that had guided her before. She knew the risk. She could be laughed at, dismissed, or ignored, but she also felt the call too strongly to resist. Every fiber of her being seemed to insist that she play, that she step into the light once more. With a deep breath, she placed her tray down and walked toward the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, remembering the notes, the flow of melodies that had once only lived in her apartment. The room grew still, the ambient chatter dying down as the audience became aware that something was about to happen. Skeptical glances from some guests remained, but there were also faces lit with anticipation, curiosity, and even hope. The first note rang out softly, delicate and inviting. It filled the room like a gentle wave, catching the attention of everyone present. As the music continued, she allowed herself to become fully absorbed, moving naturally with the rhythm and letting the notes guide her expression. The audience, initially cautious, began to lean in, their skepticism fading with each measure. There was something magnetic about the performance, something that demanded attention without force. It was not about showmanship or grandeur. It was about honesty, about expressing a part of herself that could not remain hidden. The young waitress felt a connection building with the listeners. She sensed their emotions shifting, noticed subtle changes in posture and the way their eyes followed her hands. Some faces softened with awe, others with curiosity, but all were engaged. She realized that the music was bridging a gap, transforming a room of strangers into an audience united by emotion, a shared experience that transcended social status and expectations. The melody swelled, carrying with it not only technical skill but deep feeling. She poured her heart into every chord, allowing the music to speak for her, to convey what words could not. The piano became an extension of herself, and she moved with confidence and fluidity, no longer afraid of judgment. The audience's reaction was immediate and profound. Gasps of surprise, whispered words of admiration, and smiles of genuine appreciation rippled across the room. It was clear that this was not just a performance. It was a moment of transformation, a collective awakening to something unexpected and beautiful. In the midst of the music, she noticed the reactions of some guests who had previously seemed dismissive. One man in a tailored suit, who had rolled his eyes when she approached the piano, now watched with rapt attention. His expression softened, a faint smile tugging at his lips. A woman who had been scrolling on her phone had stopped mid-motion, her eyes wide, her body leaning forward slightly as if drawn into the spell of the melody. The music had transcended their assumptions, their judgments, and revealed a truth that could not be ignored. Her hands danced across the keys, moving effortlessly from soft, gentle notes to bold, resonant chords. Each transition was precise yet imbued with emotion, conveying joy, longing, and a quiet intensity that gripped the room. It was as if the piano spoke for her, telling stories of resilience, hope, and the beauty of sharing one's gifts without reservation. The audience's response grew, their initial politeness replaced by genuine engagement. Some whispered to each other in astonishment, others closed their eyes, savoring the music, and a few even shed quiet tears. The young waitress allowed herself to lose herself in the performance. She no longer thought about the risk, the judgment, or the expectations. There was only the music, the flow of sound, and the connection it created. She felt a sense of freedom, of release, as if every note carried away fear, doubt, and hesitation. The room seemed to breathe with her, a living, dynamic entity shaped by the power of her expression. As the final notes approached, she slowed her pace, allowing each sound to linger and resonate. The room fell silent, suspended in the lingering beauty of the music. For a heartbeat, there was no movement, no sound, only a shared awareness of what had just transpired. Then, as if released from a spell, the audience erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, a chorus of genuine appreciation that reverberated through the restaurant. Some guests stood clapping enthusiastically, while others cheered softly, tears glistening in their eyes. It was more than recognition. It was a celebration of courage, talent, and the unexpected power of authenticity. The young waitress sat back, her hands resting lightly on the keys, a blush creeping across her cheeks. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, a profound sense of satisfaction that went beyond the applause. This was not about being admired. It was about having the courage to reveal a part of herself, to trust her own abilities, and to share something deeply personal with the world. She had stepped into the light and, in doing so, transformed the space, touched the audience, and reaffirmed her own sense of purpose. The manager approached once again, his expression a mixture of pride and astonishment. He whispered, almost reverently, "That was extraordinary." "Absolutely extraordinary," she nodded, her heart swelling with quiet pride. The staff gathered nearby, some clapping softly, others smiling in shared admiration. The moment was intimate, yet it carried a weight that could be felt by everyone present. As the night continued, guests approached her with words of praise and astonishment. They asked questions about her music, expressed curiosity, and even offered suggestions for future performances. She responded with humility, keeping her focus on the simple joy of playing, the connection she felt with the audience, and the fulfillment that came from sharing her talent. Each interaction reinforced the realization that stepping forward, despite fear, had opened doors she had never imagined. When the last guests left, the restaurant fell silent once more. The young waitress lingered near the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The notes were familiar, comforting, and intimate, a quiet reflection of the powerful moments of the evening. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the opportunity to perform, but for the courage that had carried her to this point. The experience had shown her that authenticity, talent, and bravery could create moments of profound connection, even in unexpected places. She closed the piano cover gently, lingering for a moment, savoring the memory of the performance and the reaction it had sparked. The night had been transformative, a reminder that sometimes the world notices when one dares to step out of the shadows. She knew that this was only the beginning, that her journey as a performer, however uncertain, had already begun. With a final glance around the empty restaurant, she turned off the lights and walked toward the back, carrying not only trays but also a renewed sense of confidence, purpose, and possibility. Tonight had proven that courage and talent, when embraced fully, could change not only the life of the performer but also the hearts of those who witnessed it. The following morning, the young waitress arrived at the restaurant with a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. The memory of the last performance lingered in her mind, replaying itself in flashes. The applause, the surprised faces, and the overwhelming sense of connection that she had never felt before. She wondered how it might change things today, if at all. Would the patrons remember? Or would it fade into a story whispered among the staff? As she stepped inside, she immediately noticed subtle differences. Some regular guests gave her small nods of recognition, smiles appearing where there had once been polite distance. The staff exchanged glances and quiet smiles, a shared acknowledgement that something extraordinary had happened, and that the air felt different, charged with new possibility. She moved through the restaurant, her tray balanced effortlessly, though her mind wandered. The memory of the piano called to her, that quiet, powerful pull that had guided her the night before. It was not only a source of music, but a doorway into something deeper, something she had long kept hidden. For the first time, she felt that sharing her talent was not a risk, but a natural extension of who she was. Each step toward the piano seemed less daunting now, less about the fear of judgment and more about embracing her gift fully. The manager, noticing her focus, approached with a quiet smile. "The guests are talking about your performance," he said softly. "Many of them couldn't stop mentioning it. You've made a real impression." She nodded, feeling a mixture of humility and quiet pride. The words were encouraging, but more importantly, they confirmed what she already knew. The music had a power that extended beyond herself. It had touched others, and that awareness filled her with a sense of purpose. As the evening approached, the restaurant began to fill. Patrons moved through the space with a subtle energy, conversations carrying an undercurrent of anticipation. When the piano slot opened, whispers floated through the room, a mix of curiosity and excitement. The young waitress felt that familiar compulsion, stronger now than ever, urging her to take the seat and play. Her fingers itched, her heart raced, and for a moment, she allowed herself a quiet inhale, centering herself before stepping into the light. She moved toward the piano, each step deliberate yet light with confidence. The audience had shifted slightly. The skepticism that had lingered before was softened, replaced with anticipation and curiosity. She sat down, brushed her fingers over the keys, and let the first note sound. It was delicate, almost tentative, but it carried with it the depth of feeling that had been building inside her for years. The room fell quiet, all eyes turning toward her as the music began to flow. The young waitress allowed herself to become immersed in the performance, letting the melody guide her expression. The music spoke of resilience, hope, and the quiet strength of someone who had waited long to be heard. Each note resonated, carrying emotion and truth that transcended words. The audience, initially tentative, leaned in, captivated by the unexpected depth and skill displayed before them. Some held their breath, others closed their eyes, allowing the sound to wash over them, and a few even whispered softly to each other in astonishment. The melody grew, transitioning smoothly from gentle passages to bold, expressive chords. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her own voice, telling a story of hidden talent, of courage, and of the transformative power of authenticity. The audience's response shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement. Faces that had been skeptical now glowed with admiration, a few even shedding quiet tears at the beauty of what they were witnessing. The energy in the room felt alive, vibrating with emotion and shared understanding. The young waitress noticed the subtle changes in the audience, seeing in real time the impact of her music. A man who had been particularly critical before now leaned forward, his eyes wide, watching with intense focus. A woman who had been scrolling on her phone had stopped completely, her attention fully captured. The music was no longer simply an expression. It was a bridge connecting her to every person in the room, creating a shared experience that went beyond words. As the performance continued, she felt a profound sense of liberation. The fear that had once held her back seemed to dissolve with every note. She realized that the music was not just for the audience. It was also for herself, a declaration of her own worth and a release of the emotions she had carried silently for so long. The piano responded effortlessly, each key a conduit for expression, each melody a testament to courage and authenticity. When the final chord resonated through the room, silence fell for a heartbeat heavy with awe and appreciation. Then the applause erupted, louder and more sustained than ever before. Guests stood, clapping, cheering, and some even calling out words of praise. The young waitress felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of relief, pride, and overwhelming gratitude. It was more than recognition. It was a validation of her courage, her decision to embrace her talent, and her willingness to share it with the world. The manager approached once more, his face alight with admiration. "That was beyond extraordinary," he said softly, almost reverently. "You've truly changed the energy in this place tonight." She nodded, feeling a quiet warmth in her chest. The staff gathered nearby, some clapping softly, others exchanging knowing glances. It was a shared celebration, an acknowledgement of something rare and special that had unfolded in the restaurant. Throughout the evening, guests approached her with compliments, questions, and expressions of wonder. They wanted to know more about her music, how she had developed her talent, and if she would perform again. She answered with humility, savoring the connection she was making and the quiet joy of sharing something deeply personal. Each interaction reinforced the understanding that stepping into the spotlight, despite fear, had opened doors and created opportunities that she had never imagined. As the night wore on, the young waitress moved among the tables with a renewed sense of confidence. Her steps were lighter, her smiles more genuine, and her presence seemed to carry an energy that had been absent before. She realized that the act of performing had transformed not only how others perceived her, but also how she perceived herself. The music had become a symbol of courage, a reminder that embracing her abilities could lead to profound and unexpected outcomes. By the end of the evening, the restaurant had quieted down. The last guest had left, but the warmth of the night lingered in the air. The young waitress approached the piano once more, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. She played a few soft, private notes, savoring the intimacy of the moment and reflecting on the journey she had begun. The experience had been transformative, a confirmation that courage, talent, and authenticity could touch hearts and inspire change. She closed the piano cover gently, taking a deep breath as she stood. The night had been more than a performance. It had been a revelation, a reminder that stepping forward and embracing one's gifts could create lasting impact. The young waitress knew that this was only the beginning. Her talent had been recognized, her courage had been rewarded, and the world had responded in ways she had never expected. With a quiet sense of fulfillment, she turned off the lights and walked toward the back, ready to face whatever opportunities lay ahead, carrying the knowledge that she had truly made a difference through the power of her music. The following morning felt different, though the restaurant looked the same as ever. The young waitress arrived, carrying her usual tray and her usual careful smile, but inside, she felt a new sense of purpose. The events of the past few nights had transformed her perspective. She had discovered something powerful within herself, something that could not be ignored or contained. Her talent, once hidden, had become a bridge to the world, a way to connect with people in ways she had never imagined. The staff welcomed her with quiet smiles and whispered congratulations. The manager greeted her warmly, his eyes reflecting admiration and respect. Even the patrons who had arrived early seemed to recognize the shift, their casual nods and polite greetings carrying an unspoken acknowledgement of the young waitress's extraordinary gift. She moved through the space with an easy confidence, her steps deliberate but light, her presence calm and assured. Orders were taken and served, drinks refilled, and the rhythm of the restaurant flowed as usual. Yet beneath the surface, something had changed. The young waitress noticed how guests now observed her with subtle curiosity, a sense of anticipation in their eyes. Some who had been critical before were now more attentive, watching with interest and appreciation. It was a reminder that courage and talent could break through barriers and alter perceptions in ways that were both surprising and profound. When the opportunity arose to play the piano once more, the young waitress felt the familiar pull. Her hands itched with anticipation, and her heart raced with excitement. She walked to the instrument with confidence, knowing that this moment was hers to embrace fully. The audience, sensing her presence, grew quiet, their attention focused entirely on her. Skepticism had been replaced with curiosity, and the room seemed to hold its breath in expectation. The first note sounded, soft and inviting, carrying the weight of her emotions and the depth of her talent. The melody flowed naturally, each chord resonating with clarity and intention. As she played, the young waitress allowed herself to be fully immersed in the music. Her fingers moved effortlessly, guided by instinct and experience, creating a tapestry of sound that filled the room with warmth, emotion, and beauty. The guests listened, captivated by the performance. Faces that had once been critical were now open, expressions softened, eyes wide with admiration. Some whispered quietly to each other, sharing their astonishment, while others closed their eyes, absorbing the music in silence. The young waitress felt a profound connection with the audience, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. Her music was not just entertainment. It was communication, a bridge linking her heart to theirs. As the performance continued, she explored the full range of the piano, moving from gentle, reflective passages to bold, expressive chords. Each note carried meaning, telling a story of courage, perseverance, and the quiet strength of someone who had waited patiently to be heard. The audience responded with genuine emotion, their engagement deepening with every measure. It was a moment of shared humanity, a reminder that beauty and talent could emerge in the most unexpected places. The young waitress noticed the subtle shifts in the room. A man who had appeared stern and critical before now leaned forward, captivated by the music. A woman who had seemed indifferent at first was now fully attentive, her eyes glistening with emotion. The audience had become a living entity, responding instinctively to the flow of her performance. It was a dynamic, interactive experience, and she felt herself both giving and receiving energy, connected to everyone present in a profound and meaningful way. As she reached the climax of the piece, the music swelled, powerful and commanding, yet full of delicate nuance. Each chord resonated, carrying her emotions outward, touching the hearts of the audience. She felt a sense of liberation, a release of all the doubts and fears that had once held her back. The piano became an extension of her spirit, a vehicle for expression that transcended words. In that moment, she was not just a waitress or a performer. She was a conduit for something greater, something that connected everyone in the room. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and fading, allowing the audience a moment to absorb the depth of what they had just experienced. Silence followed, heavy with awe and reflection before erupting into applause. The sound was overwhelming, heartfelt, and sustained. Guests rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, and some even calling out words of admiration. The young waitress felt a wave of emotion sweep over her, a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. It was not about recognition alone. It was about the connection she had fostered, the impact she had made, and the courage she had discovered within herself. The manager approached, his face radiant with pride. "That was incredible," he whispered, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've truly transformed this place tonight." She nodded, her heart swelling with quiet satisfaction. The staff gathered nearby, some clapping softly, others exchanging knowing smiles. The moment was intimate yet profound, a celebration of talent, courage, and authenticity. Throughout the evening, guests approached her, expressing admiration, curiosity, and amazement. They asked questions about her music, about how she had learned, and whether she would perform again. She responded with humility, appreciating their interest and the opportunity to connect with them on a deeper level. Each interaction reinforced the understanding that her choice to embrace her talent had created opportunities and connections she had never anticipated. It was more than applause. It was the recognition of courage, of authenticity, and of the transformative power of sharing one's gifts. As the night wore on, she moved through the restaurant with a renewed sense of purpose. Her confidence had grown, her steps lighter, and her presence more assured. She realized that performing had not only changed how others saw her, but also how she saw herself. The music had become a source of strength, a reminder that talent, courage, and authenticity could open doors, transform perceptions, and create moments of genuine human connection. When the last guests had left, she lingered near the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The notes were soft, intimate, and comforting, a reflection of the journey she had taken and the courage she had embraced. The memory of the applause, the astonished faces, and the quiet moments of connection filled her with a sense of fulfillment. She had discovered that taking risks, trusting herself, and sharing her gifts could change not only her life but also the lives of those around her. She closed the piano cover gently, savoring the quiet of the empty restaurant. The night had been transformative, a testament to the power of courage, authenticity, and talent. The young waitress knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. Her life had shifted in ways she could not yet fully comprehend, and the opportunities ahead felt limitless. She turned off the lights, walking toward the back with a quiet smile, carrying not just trays and utensils but also a renewed sense of confidence, purpose, and possibility. The world had noticed her, but more importantly, she had noticed herself, and that awareness would guide her every step forward.